Connor Chung is director of policy content here at Our National Conversation, ournationalconversation.org. But he's also a contributor. Connor, you wrote an article that I read multiple times, Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. Let me see if I can sum this up, and you tell me if this is an accurate representation of your piece or not. You argue that while the Western world has made significant progress in terms of technological, economic, and social advancements, this progress has come at the cost of eroding traditional moral values, Christian foundations, and the nuclear family, leading to societal fragmentation and a weakening of national identity. Is that fair? Anything you want to add to that?
That's it. You nailed it.
I'm so good. But anyways, walk me through this article and the arguments you make. Like, what inspired you to write it? Why is it important for people to read it? Is this article designed to like reaffirm what some people like already believe, like preaching to the choir, so to speak? Or is it like, are you trying to like get non-believers to question their worldview, look more into what you're proposing?
That's exactly it. It's the latter. I mean, I don't think I'm reaffirming anybody's beliefs because our society has strayed so far away from, traditional American values rooted in Christianity, the nuclear family, which, Vivek Ramaswamy says is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. And I think he's right about that. And I think so many people, especially young people, have abandoned these values. These are the things that made our country great. When a child grows up in a united home with a loving mother and a loving father, they go on to be more productive members of society. They grow up to be happier, and when you're happier, you're more productive at work, and you contribute more to our country. So that's a huge part of it. But I think in today's world, you look at the degree of moral corruption. It's, to me, this might be a strong word for some people, but it's a cesspool of moral degeneracy, and amoral relativism is what we're living in now. It's everything is just somehow an abstraction of the white patriarchy, right? Of the old regime and old moral values tied to Christianity. And so, go ahead. Yeah, go out and just sleep with a bunch of people and, have orgies all the time. There are no consequences to that. It was just the Christians that told you that. And
who are having these orgies all the time?
I mean, just look at our society.
I haven't seen these orgies. I haven't been invited to these orgies.
Come on, Chris. People are so loose these days. I mean, our society is so hypersexualized. And in reality, of course, sex is it's an important part of of a healthy relationship, but it's just being shoved in our face at every turn. It permeates Hollywood. It encourages young women to be overly promiscuous, and also this isn't good for young men either. And all that it disrupts the nuclear family, and it teaches people to be loose with their morals. And these are the morals that built our country, and when we throw those away, we end up where we are today.
Let me ask you something. What is overly promiscuous to you?
Well, I think that, listen, I grew up Christian, and, I don't subscribe to any sort of church anymore. I wouldn't necessarily call myself religious, but I believe in the power of Christianity to guide people and to act as a moral framework for our society. It's been the moral framework of America for centuries now, up until these, destructive left-wing social movements that started in the 60s that tore all that away. And now you have rates of fatherlessness going up and so forth. But, to get back to your question, I think, more and more I'm starting to believe that, it isn't so great for men or for women just to sleep around willy-nilly. I think sex is a sacred thing. And I think you give a part of yourself away to every single person that you sleep with. And that kind of chips away at your soul. It chips away at your integrity as a person. And I don't know. I don't know if you can put a specific number on it, but I can tell you that,
over under 10. No, I'm just kidding. Let me ask you something, because and fair enough. I mean, I think sex is personal to to each person, you know. So like, but your definition of overly promiscuous is not going to mesh with someone else necessarily with someone else's definition of what overly promiscuous is. And it's like, so to say that, like, to kind of like, because are you saying that this promiscuity, all this stuff, is leading to a moral decay in our country, and that we need to clamp down on this?
Yes, because it fosters the growth of an intellectually shallow and perverse populace. I mean, and it's not just about sex, you know. It's just all sorts of other forms of hedonism. You know, sex is just one of the cards that you can pull out from the deck, but really, we're promoting hedonism, and decadence is the best word to describe what's going on in America today. And it makes me really sad. You know, decadence oftentimes is the downfall of a lot of great civilizations. You know, you can look back to antiquity, the Greeks and the Romans, and they suffered the same fate when they got too decadent. And, you know, people became perverse and shallow and just living. There's more to life than just living for these fleeting momentary pleasures. But that's all our ideologies teach kids these days, is that, if you're a young woman, just go out there and, live your life and, experience as many sexual partners as you can. And same thing for men, go out there and just do the same and, party and, don't bother with, having any integrity as a man and buckling down and doing what you need to do, and experiencing something, aspiring towards something that's greater than yourself and your base animal instincts. When you promote that among young men and young women, and you say, just go out and just, have fun and drink and party and have sex and listen to music and, just live for these fleeting momentary pleasures. It's damaging. It's, these aren't good values to be teaching our young people.
Fair enough. Now, to get off the subject of sex, I want to talk about that a little bit later, because I think there are real reasons for the rise of quote unquote sexual freedom or whatnot. But I do want to break down this article a little bit by bit, because there are a couple things that you said that really did stick out to me. And if we're talking about, like, because when you say the Western world, I think you're essentially attacking liberalism. I think, and when we say liberalism, I don't mean specifically the Democrats. I mean, liberalism is not, Democrats do not have a monopoly on liberalism. Like, Republicans are, in our.
No, I have nothing against classical liberalism.
Okay. Now, moving on to your article, I want to quote. Now, okay. So I thought this was maybe the most radical passage from your article. Okay. Now, some could argue, I think there are some that would argue it's problematic. I know that word. Ooh, we don't like that word. But it's very like on the fence rhetoric. And let me read it to you, and then we can talk about it. I am very interested in talking about this. The advent of immoral secularism and the destruction of the foundational pillars of the Western world, Christianity, traditional moral values, and the nuclear family, has rendered many a once great nation absent of a unified national identity and a thorough moral framework. The West is now left saddled with a multiplicity of contentious individual group identities and various moral perversions reminiscent of the Weimar Republic during the 1920s. It divides us and makes us weak. I think the invocation of the Weimar Republic and the championing of traditional, Christian values, without criticizing the Nazis or even mentioning the Nazis, and criticizing the Christian values that were perverted by the Nazi Party and the dangers of that authoritarian regime, it really seems like you missed a very important part of that paragraph. But I just wanted to point that out. I've been actually listening to a podcast about the rise of Nazism, and so I'm actually pretty interested in this era right now. It just seemed like, should we have omitted the Nazis in that paragraph?
No, I don't think I missed anything. I'm talking about a completely different era of German history, long before the Nazis ever came to power.
Not long
And
before.
this was in the 1920s. This was well over a decade before
The
the
Weimar Republic
Nazis.
fell to the Nazis.
Yeah, over a decade later. This was a different time in history.
But this was the previous era to Nazis. Before Nazis, it was the Weimar Republic.
Sure, yeah, and that's
there
why
wasn't a thing in between.
Right. No, you're correct. Yeah, the Weimar Republic.
So, like,
came
we look at
before
liberalism
Nazi
and
Germany.
the moral decay and the decadence and of Weimar Republic on display, and we look at a return to traditional Christian values. That's what the Nazis were saying before they took power from the Weimar Republic.
I don't think so. I think that the Nazis were a pretty secular sort of humanist movement, and there was a lot of kind of like a weird occultism going on in there. But my point in drawing a parallel between our society and the Weimar Republic is that it was hard for me to find another recent example of the culturally destructive decadence in recent history in the last 100 years that just eats away at a society's integrity. And I just couldn't find something of the same magnitude and of the same ilk, and that's where it led me. I'm not ensuing that we're going to see the rise of the American Nazi Party anytime soon. Look, that was a very different time in history. First of all, it was a different country. America is a different country than Germany. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I wanted to point out this era of German history, the Weimar era, and how I think we're reminiscent of a lot of these. A lot of what's going on right now.
I don't want to criticize the Weimar Republic without also condemning the Nazi regime. I think it's hard to separate those two because it's a cause and effect. And I think it's important to remember.
I don't think America's in the same boat as the Weimar Republic. While I do see a lot of resemblances between that time period and what's going on in our country, I'm not too concerned that we're going to see the rise of the American neo-Nazi party and biker gangs with swastikas tattooed on their back in the Oval Office. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon.
But, we're talking insane hyperinflation. We're talking the economy was decimated, the reparations that they had to pay. But we're also talking about and this is where I know. This is interesting because I used to be someone that was maybe a third party is a good idea. I was maybe it's not a bad idea. And I know ONC's Jeff from ONC is also was look at the demand for a third party. Now, when I've been studying the rise of Nazism and the fall of the Weimar Republic, to me, what a principal difference is the amount of parties that were there at the time. There wasn't a two-party system. There was communists, there was socialists, there were Nazis, there were fascists. There were quite a few, and now I'm starting to think, the fragmentation of a two-party system into a third party. Well, wow, that can really help an extremist group, because how the Nazis did it was they used. And everyone thought they were using each other, but the Nazis were the ones that were successful, and they were able to use the communists against the who are they? The social Democrats or whatever.
Democrats?
Yeah, Hindenburg or whatnot, and they were able to use that to attain power. Even though the communists thought they were using the Nazis, the social democrats thought they were using the Nazi. Everyone thought they were using each other. But to me, now I'm starting to think, maybe a two-party system's actually pretty good. I don't think we should have more than a two-party system. I think that could escalate very fast. I don't know. That was just a thought I had. But I definitely want to talk about the nuclear family. You talk a lot about the nuclear family. Now, I personally don't think it's entrenched in American history as much as you do, but let me just quote your article on it. Modern liberalism has the sexes more estranged from each other now more than ever, thrusting a wrench into what is perhaps America's most important institution, the nuclear family, the timeless bedrock of our country's prosperity and stability. Now, my definition of a nuclear family, I'm under the assumption it's a mom, it's a dad, it's children, or it's a couple and children. That is a nuclear family. Like, it doesn't have to be as socially strict as a mom and a dad, but I do know that there is a contingent of conservatives that feel like marriage is between a man and a woman. So mom, dad, children to some, couple, and children to others. Is that a correct definition of what the nuclear family is?
Yeah, I'd say a man and a woman, wedded together under the institution of marriage and children.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was raised in a nuclear family until I was 11. I'm not sure. But, I never really looked into the nuclear family that much because I do hear it all. I think we take the nuclear family for granted, essentially. But when I know, like, throughout my reading of American history, especially, extended families were the dominant, like, family structure until industrialization, which fragmented extended families into nuclear families. So to me, I'm thinking the nuclear family is a product of modernity, and the fragmentation at post-nuclear family into co-parenting situations or single-parent households is just a natural progression from extended family to what we're seeing today. And when I look at it, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong here, and I'd love to hear you talk more extensively about the nuclear family, that the nuclear family is kind of a blip in American history.
Well, what do you mean by what was the word you just used?
Extended family.
Extended family. How do you
extended
define
family? Parents, children, grandparents,
so
uncles,
multiple
aunts
generations living in the same
multiple
household.
generations, multiple family members living in the same household. This has been, not only was this like the dominant family structure throughout all of history, but when you look at America, it's the dominant family structure until industrialization.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's just another form of the nuclear family, in my opinion. It's just it's the forebear of the nuclear family. Once industrialization came along and the cost of living started to rise, and people also got wealthier in the post-industrial age, and so it just allowed people to break off from that precursor model of the nuclear family. But I think the most important aspect of it across Western history is one man, one woman, and children under the Christian institution of marriage, and these are the things that help keep society in check and help promote the growth of healthy children over the course of their childhood, so that they're better equipped to join society as functioning and not dysfunctioning adults. In split families, you have a much higher rate of dysfunction. These are the people who are in therapy all the time because going through a divorce as a kid is rough, and so forth. Or just growing up without a father figure is one of the most damaging things you can do to a child. I think there's a lot of strong single moms out there, but that's not the right way for a child to be growing up. They need a strong masculine male figure in the picture. It's yin and yang. Men and women are very different creatures, but they're also very complementary to one another. And it's the same thing as yin and yang in the ancient Taoism or Confucianism. It's harmony. They're very different, yet one can't exist without the other. And that's where I see a lot of moral perversion these days, is when you try to sub one out. You say, well, you can have two yins instead of a yin and yang, and it's all going to fall out of balance.
So, I mean, the article is called Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. I think extended family, tradition, nuclear family, product of modernity. And you could say extended family is a forebear to the nuclear family, but by that logic, you could also say the nuclear family is a forebear to like a co-parenting situation. Now, I disagree with you in the sense that I think extended family and nuclear families are the same or similar enough to group them into the nuclear family like subset, because and I was thinking about this. I think there's an inherent there is. I don't think the nuclear family is as perfect, as we hold it up to be. Instead of talking about statistics, I'll just talk about from a personal perspective. I was raised in a nuclear family. I would have preferred being raised in an extended family, because when I was raised in a nuclear family, I think that centralizes a lot of power into my dad. My dad had a lot of power in that dynamic, and I think he had too much power. I think he abused that power, over and over and over again. That's why my parents split up, and God, bless her for leaving him. But I remember years later, after being raised by just a single mother, years later, I have run into certain family members. And I've heard my brothers talk about like what family members have said about that period of time when it was just because my dad isolated us from family, from extended family. He isolated because like my uncles and aunts, they were like, we just didn't know what was going on. Like he isolated you guys. He wouldn't allow us to visit. If we knew what was going on, we would have intervened. And that was the safeguard of an extended family, as you have multiple adults and power isn't concentrated in one member of the family. Like, I think this is all a gray area, but what I'm trying to like get at is I don't think the nuclear family is necessarily the peak, so to speak, whereas I'm thinking that in your opinion, the nuclear family is the extended family is a forebear. It's evolved into the nuclear family, which is the peak. As Vivek said, the strongest mode of government or that mankind has ever devised. And then you think it dips afterwards in regards to single parent and co-parenting situations.
Yeah. So, I mean, in my opinion, I think that, whether you're living in an extended family, I know some people who, mostly, Southeast Asians and other cultures, they do the extended family unit. And I mean, I just see a lot of, it's very similar in a lot of ways, okay, yeah, you're living with a lot more people under the same roof, but it's like, it's still this sort of nuclear family structure. You have he's got his mother and his father who are there, and, they're kind of of course, they're his parents, so he listens to them on most things, right? But you also have the grandparents under the roof, and they're there to speak, ancestral wisdom sometimes and so forth, and brothers and sisters and siblings.
Power is not as centralized, essentially. Power is not as centralized.
Well, I think that grandparents aren't going to intervene. From my experience, they don't intervene too much in their children's parenting decisions. Sure, they might be there to kind of mediate something sometimes, but it's this. It's still teaching kids that, hey, you need a mother, you need a father, and whether you want to house your grandparent, your grandmother and your grandfather under the same roof, then that's a cultural choice. But it's certainly it's preferable to single motherhood, where basically in today's world you have this agreement between young women in the state, and the state says you give me unwavering loyalty to left-wing causes. And in return, we replace men. We give you government subsidies. We give you sustenance in the form of food stamps. We give you, housing credits and tax credits and child tax breaks and all these other things. And they say, we'll do all the stuff that you used to have to outsource to men. We'll do it for you, so you don't need men anymore. Men aren't worth anything. And women agree to this because it gives them, it unshackles them from the patriarchy. And I think it's just been a minority of feminists who keep pushing this, say, men are worthless, so we don't need them anymore. When really our entire world, everything that's around you, the sidewalks and the roads and the buildings that you walk into every day were built by men. And, you can't take that for granted. I think a lot of young women kind of buy into these ideas because they don't know any better. And they want to believe in ideas like freedom for women and all this stuff. And I'm not saying that there aren't, bad aspects of the patriarchy, because there certainly are, but there are also bad aspects of the matriarchy and the feminine character. And when you completely flip-flop, I think men and women need each other a lot more than either of them are willing to admit. And that's why I think both the sexes are super lonely these days, more lonelier than they've ever been. And a lot of young women don't want to admit it. But I think they miss men, like a good man. And I think it's vice versa for men. We need each other.
Yeah, let's move on to fatherlessness because that's something that your article talks about. It's something that I've constantly heard from the right is fatherlessness, and the devastating effect that it has. And the numbers are clear that that like children in a single, like, that do not have two parents are more at risk. Like, those numbers are clear to me. But when I was looking at the numbers, like you were mentioning the welfare state or whatnot, as a way to replace men or whatnot, or as like a cause or somehow of this fatherlessness crisis. And I've heard that welfare benefits are a scapegoat too. Now, I looked at a study from Brookings. They were citing a couple other studies, but they found that welfare benefits, because like liberals will say it's due to the decline in like marriageability, due to you know, incarceration or job shortages for black men. Because when we talk about fatherlessness a lot, we often talk about it in terms of the black family unit. Now, Brookings said that like they didn't find that welfare benefits played a major role in the increase of out of wedlock births. They found that the liberal argument, decline in marriageability and whatnot, played a larger role than the welfare argument, but still not a substantial enough role to chalk it all up. I mean, essentially, they argued that the root cause of the out of wedlock birth fatherlessness crisis can be chalked to technology shock. When we're talking about contraceptions and stuff like that, the pill or whatnot, and you know, which basically like led
higher
to
rates
like
of
sexual
promiscuity,
freedom, you know,
which is often
it's,
labeled as sexual freedom.
well, it was a decline in shotgun weddings. Like it was a technology shock, which led to, but that caused a stark decline in shotgun weddings, which led to an increase in out of wedlock childbirths. Now, I mean, I don't know. Like, sexual abstinence is rare. You know, the stigma of out of wedlock moms is small. I don't think that's going away. I don't think you put that genie back in the box. So I feel like these attempts to restrict like the autonomy, you know, and individual freedom of like women is like those measures would lead to a rise in this problem. It would not alleviate this problem. It would perpetuate it. You would see an increase in fatherless children and child poverty. So what is the solution here for fatherlessness? If not that, because in my opinion, I don't think that's it.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, the genie's kind of out of the bottle now, and it's tough to shove it back in. But I mean, going back to, you know, the welfare state earlier, I don't think that it's the cause. It's definitely not the cause of fatherlessness, but it definitely aids in the perpetuating of single motherhood, which is not good. You know, it just contributes to children growing up without a father, because there's no need for a woman to go out there and to, you know, it comes back to the principle about committing to something higher than yourself. And in this case, that means, you know, the future well-being of your child, which for me is dependent upon, you know, the nuclear family and growing up with a solid, upstanding man in the picture alongside a solid, upstanding woman. And when you don't have that, it just wreaks havoc on society. I'm not sure what the answer to fatherlessness is. I mean, really, I mean, I guess my answer would be a return to something approximating Christian values. Because when you really look at it, I think the rate of fatherlessness was a lot lower back when people felt like they had to commit themselves to each other for better or for worse under the Christian institution of marriage. You know, you can talk about this in Europe 100, 200, or 300 years ago. You can talk about it in America or the rest of the Western world. But it was about really
women had considerably less freedom.
It was about sticking things out. And this is something my mom always told me. She said, you know, your father and I were married for 37 years or whatever. And trust me, there were some really hard times where, you know, it could have been really easy for me, like a lot of these young women do these days, to just pick up and leave because we've normalized it and say, oh, well, you know, you're kind of being a shithead. So I think I'm just going to pack my bags, you know. Why should I have to put up with this? You know, well, that's what you sign up for in marriage. And I'm
very glad my mom didn't do that. I'm very glad my mom didn't stick it out.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I don't know what your mom's situation was. Obviously, if you're getting beat, then get the hell out of there. But what I'm saying is that I think young people these days are just too prone to just giving up too quick. I mean, nobody said marriage was going to be easy. It's through thick and through thin. And so you work these problems out if you can. If you're being hit, get out of there. But I think we'd have a much lower rate of fatherlessness if people just could commit to something bigger than themselves. And I think it is selfish to an extent to just say, oh, well, things are kind of getting a little tough now, and I haven't really liked your attitude over the last 3 or 4 months. So, I could probably find something better elsewhere. That's not helping the situation.